catastrophic HOA spreadsheet error that had happened overnight, the neighborhood's quarterly mandatory spring landscape audit was scheduled for that exact morning, and due to a copy-paste mistake in the HOA master calendar, my home address had been incorrectly listed as the official neighborhood check-in station for all volunteer auditors, meaning 18 HOA volunteer inspectors were currently walking toward my house to set up their command center on my front lawn. Unaware of the last-minute scheduling glitch and completely unaware my lawn was now a federally protected wildlife zone with legal restrictions against foot traffic and disturbance, I froze in total shock as I processed the impossible timing of this bureaucratic disaster. My lawn was legally off-limits for all activity due to the bird nest protection order, yet the entire neighborhood inspection team was minutes away from setting up tables, spreading out paperwork, and conducting a full community audit operation directly on my restricted grass. Within seconds, I watched a large group of 18 volunteers round the corner and head straight for my driveway, all carrying folding tables, inspection checklists, measuring tapes, and community compliance documents, ready to launch their official quarterly audit right on my protected lawn. I quickly pulled the lead HOA volunteer aside and explained the entire overnight wildlife situation, showing her the city cone, explaining the federal nest protection rules, and clarifying that my front yard was legally unusable for any group activity for the next 30 days. The volunteer coordinator turned pale with embarrassment, realizing the HOA had accidentally scheduled a massive public community event directly on a legally restricted wildlife protection zone with zero prior research or communication. The entire volunteer team froze on the sidewalk, stuck in an impossible no-win conflict. They could not set up on my lawn due to federal wildlife law. They could not relocate to another common area because all neighborhood pavilions and green spaces were reserved for a local school fundraiser. They could not reschedule the audit because it was a state-mandated quarterly compliance deadline with no extension options, and they had zero other backup locations approved by the HOA board. Feeling guilty that my random wildlife situation had derailed an entire neighborhood volunteer event through no fault of my own, I brainstormed a last-minute compromise, offering my concrete front porch and wide driveway as a substitute command center, fully outside the protected lawn zone, allowing the team to complete their mandatory check-in and disperse without breaking any laws or missing their deadline. The entire group erupted in relieved thanks, endlessly praising me for my flexibility and problem-solving, and they quickly set up their full inspection headquarters across my porch and driveway, turning my quiet residential entryway into a bustling neighborhood community hub while I returned indoors to continue my remote corporate work. For the next full hour, my home became the accidental center of neighborhood activity. Volunteers cycled in and out constantly to turn in inspection reports. Neighbors stopped by to ask compliance questions, impromptu committee meetings broke out on my porch steps, and multiple curious residents lingered to chat about the bizarre conflict between federal wildlife rules and local HOA policy, all while I sat indoors attending virtual work meetings, typing official reports, and meeting strict professional deadlines, balancing a full-time corporate job with an unplanned all-morning neighborhood hosting gig entirely by pure random chance. Right as the HOA team finished their final check-ins and prepared to disperse across the neighborhood to complete their audits, a loud rumble of a large utility truck pulled up directly in front of my house, a city tree trimming crew arriving for a pre-scheduled seasonal foliage maintenance appointment I had completely forgotten about, scheduled months prior for that exact Tuesday morning. The uniformed crew stepped out with ladders, saws, and trimming equipment, ready to prune my front yard oak tree, completely unaware the tree now housed a federally protected active bird nest that could not be disturbed under any circumstances, creating yet another immediate high-stakes conflict. I rushed outside to stop the crew before they began working, explaining the overnight nest discovery and the legal protection order prohibiting all tree maintenance for 30 days. The crew foreman pulled up his city work order, confirmed the scheduling conflict was a result of disconnected city databases, where the wildlife protection update had never synced with the tree trimming schedule, and apologized profusely for the last-minute confusion. He documented the protected nest on his city system, rescheduled my tree trim for 31 days later, and packed up his crew, leaving me amazed at how 3 completely unrelated official systems, federal wildlife protection, local HOA governance, and city public works, had all crashed into my ordinary home on the exact same morning with zero cross-communication or coordination. Once the tree crew left and the final HOA volunteers dispersed, my house finally fell quiet again at 10:50 a.m. I sank back into my desk chair completely drained, staring out at my lawn cone and protected tree, shocked that I had already survived 3 massive layered bureaucratic disasters before mid-morning on a supposedly normal workday. I told myself firmly that the chaos was over, that nothing else could possibly go wrong, that the rest of my Tuesday would be calm, routine, and uneventful. I was spectacularly wrong. At 11:12 a.m., just as I was regaining my work rhythm and finalizing a critical client report, I heard loud, frantic rustling and panicked bleating coming from my fully fenced private backyard. A strange, high-pitched animal noise I had never heard in my suburban neighborhood before. Confused and alarmed, I rushed to my back sliding glass door and pulled back the curtain, and what I saw left me utterly speechless. Standing in the exact center of my well-kept backyard lawn, munching calmly on my clover flowers and staring back at me with big gentle eyes, was a full-grown fluffy white domestic sheep, wandering freely inside my 6-foot privacy fence, completely lost and totally out of place in my residential suburban yard. I stood frozen for a solid 10 seconds trying to process the impossibility of the scene. My neighborhood is strictly zoned residential with 0 agricultural permits, 0 livestock allowed, 0 farms within 10 miles, and 0 rural land nearby. There is absolutely no logical reason a pet sheep would be trapped in my suburban backyard in the middle of a workday. I quickly inspected my entire fence line and discovered a small rotted wooden board hidden behind my storage shed. A tiny gap just wide enough for the sheep to squeeze through overnight before getting trapped inside my enclosed yard. I immediately began researching local livestock lost and found groups, posted photos and a location alert across every neighborhood Facebook group, local community forum, and county pet recovery page, explaining that a healthy, gentle white sheep was safely contained in my backyard and begging for owner contact. Within minutes my post went viral across every local community page, hundreds of residents sharing, commenting and laughing at the absurd suburban sheep sighting, a phenomenon no one in the neighborhood had ever witnessed in decades of residency. While waiting for the owner to respond, I set out fresh water and grass for the confused sheep, monitoring its calm behavior while simultaneously continuing my remote work duties, juggling corporate report writing with accidental livestock rescue responsibilities. 25 minutes later, I received a frantic call from a retired couple who lived in a tiny rural hobby farm 10 miles outside the city limits. They explained their pet sheep named Snowflake had escaped their fenced pasture overnight, wandered 10 miles through suburban residential streets, crossed multiple busy roadways without injury, and somehow found the tiny hidden fence gap in my backyard to seek shelter. They had spent all night searching for their missing sheep and were utterly relieved to find her safe and calm in my yard. The couple rushed to my home within minutes, tearful and endlessly grateful, apologizing repeatedly for the bizarre intrusion and gifting me a huge basket of homemade jams, fresh farm eggs, and hand-poured candles as a thank you for protecting their beloved pet. They gently guided the sheep back to their trailer, shared stories of their farm animals, and laughed in disbelief at the insane string of bad luck that had led their runaway sheep straight to my already chaotic home on my already disastrous morning. Once the sheep departed and my yard was finally animal-free, the clock read 12:15 p.m. lunchtime, and I could barely comprehend that I had navigated a federally protected bird nest crisis, dual city and HOA bureaucratic conflicts, a cancelled tree trimming emergency, and a viral suburban sheep rescue all before the halfway point of my workday. I took my 30-minute lunch break sitting on my front porch, staring at my quiet lawn in pure stunned amusement, convinced beyond all doubt that the universe had exhausted every possible chaotic mishap for the day, that the afternoon would be smooth, peaceful and routine. I could not have been more wrong. Immediately after resuming work at 12:45 p.m., I walked into my downstairs bathroom and discovered a slow, steady flood of water pooling across the floor. My toilet had suffered a complete internal gasket failure overnight, leaking continuously and seeping water toward my bathroom subfloor. I rushed to my basement to shut off the main house water valve, stopping the flood but cutting off all running water to my entire home indefinitely. I called my trusted local plumber for emergency same-day repair, only to be told every plumber in the county was fully booked due to a regional midweek plumbing surge, with no available appointments until the following morning, leaving me stuck with 0 running water for the entire afternoon, evening, and night. Adding a full household plumbing emergency and residential water outage to my ever-growing list of daily catastrophes, undeterred, I adapted quickly, using bottled water for all basic hygiene needs, and powered through my entire afternoon workload with 0 delays, completing every report, answering every email, attending every meeting, and meeting all work deadlines perfectly despite the ongoing household crisis. At 2:15 p.m. mid-afternoon, just as I was wrapping up my final work tasks, my doorbell rang again, and I opened the door to find a confused delivery driver holding a massive oversized outdoor patio furniture set, dropped off at my address by mistake, intended for a house with a nearly identical street name in a neighboring subdivision, leaving me with 3 huge heavy furniture boxes cluttering my front porch with no way to return them immediately, adding yet another random, useless suburban mishap to my day's tally. At 3:10 p.m., my smart home security system alerted me to a minor front yard fence fault, and upon inspection, I discovered a small section of my picket fence had loosened from the overnight wind, requiring immediate repairs to prevent further wildlife intrusions. forcing me to step away from work to secure my property before finishing my final work assignments. Through every single unplanned interruption, every bizarre encounter, every bureaucratic mix-up, and every household failure, I remained professional, focused, and productive, logging off work promptly at 5 p.m. With every single daily task fully completed, every deadline met, and every work responsibility fulfilled perfectly, despite enduring 7 straight hours of non-stop unprecedented suburban chaos. Once free from work duties, I finally allowed myself to process the full scale of my absurd day. I had woken up expecting a bland, repetitive, ordinary weekday and instead endured a federally protected overnight bird nest surprise, a city place wildlife marker cone with legal restrictions, an accidental HOA neighborhood audit headquarters takeover, a conflicting city tree trimming scheduling disaster, a viral runaway suburban sheep rescue, a full household water outage from sudden plumbing failure, a massive misdelivered furniture shipment, and a broken fence repair emergency, every single event completely unrelated, entirely random, utterly unforeseeable, and uniquely bizarre, all stacking onto one single ordinary Tuesday for no reason other than pure, perfect, ridiculous bad luck. As the sun set gently over my quiet subdivision, neighbors slowly gathered on sidewalks to chat and laugh about my legendary chaotic day, sharing the sheep rescue photos, discussing the wild wildlife and bureaucratic conflicts, and marveling at how one ordinary resident could pack so many unbelievable events into a single normal workday. I spent my water-free evening eating a cold, simple dinner, tidying my cluttered porch, securing my fence fully, and relaxing with my completely unfazed cat, Machi, reflecting deeply on the profound lesson this absurd day had taught me about modern American suburban life. People across the country constantly stereotype suburban living as boring, monotonous, predictable, and uneventful. But the honest truth is that suburban normalcy is nothing more than a fragile illusion sustained by thousands of invisible systems working flawlessly in tandem every single day. City scheduling databases, federal wildlife protocols, HOA administrative workflows, utility company systems, livestock containment barriers, residential plumbing infrastructure, delivery route accuracy, and neighborhood communication networks. The second multiple independent systems fail randomly and simultaneously on the same ordinary day, routine life instantly spirals into a non-stop comedy of errors and surreal encounters that no fiction writer could ever replicate. I once believed memorable life stories came from travel, adventure, drama, and big life moments, but now I know for certain that the most authentic, hilarious, unique, unforgettable stories of everyday American life belong entirely to ordinary, routine-following, hard-working, regular people, just trying to get through a normal weekday caught in perfect storms of tiny, unrelated suburban mishaps that turn mundane normalcy into legendary chaos. By the time I climbed into bed at 11 p.m. that night, exhausted but endlessly amused, grateful that every chaotic event resolved safely with no damage, injury, or real loss, I had a completely new perspective on my quiet suburban neighborhood and my simple daily routine. I no longer view ordinary days as boring or monotonous. I now see every calm, problem-free day as a precious gift, and I understand fully that behind every quiet suburban street and every average person's routine life lies endless hidden potential for weird, wild, unbelievable everyday chaos. This one completely ordinary spring Tuesday transformed my entire outlook on modern American suburban living, proving once and for all that the strangest, most wonderful, most absurd moments in life never happen when you're chasing excitement or adventure. They happen when you're just trying to live a quiet, stable, normal everyday life as a regular average American in a typical suburban neighborhood. And those perfectly weird, perfectly chaotic, perfectly unplanned ordinary days create the most genuine, entertaining, and unforgettable life stories of all, stories that feel too bizarre to be real, but are simply the unfiltered, unscripted, beautiful chaos of regular everyday life in modern America that no one ever sees until it happens to them. I am just your standard, unremarkable, middle-class American civilian living in a sprawling, look-alike suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of neighborhood where every street curves in identical looping patterns, where every house has the same two-story layout, the same vinyl siding color palette, the same sized front lawn, the same wooden privacy fence wrapping around the backyard, and the same predictable routine of quiet, uneventful daily living that defines millions of ordinary American households across the country. A neighborhood where the most exciting weekly event is the local grocery store's weekend sale on barbecue sauce and sweet tea, where neighbors wave politely from driveways but almost never stop to chat for longer than 2 seconds, where the HOA monitors lawn height, porch decor, and exterior paint color with absurdly meticulous attention, where stray squirrels, rabbits, and occasional deer are the only wild visitors, and where nothing out of the ordinary is ever supposed to happen to anyone at any point in time. I am 36 years old. I work a stable, unglamorous, full-time remote office job in general administrative support for a regional healthcare billing company. A job that consists entirely of processing routine paperwork, reviewing standard billing forms, answering repetitive client emails, scheduling basic virtual appointments, updating endless rows of spreadsheet data, and sitting through weekly 10-minute team check-in meetings that follow the exact same script every single week with zero variation, zero pressure, zero career drama, zero promotions, zero conflicts, and zero excitement of any kind. It is the textbook definition of a safe, boring, steady white-collar American job. The kind of work that pays the mortgage, covers health insurance, keeps the lights on, and fills time without ever creating a single memorable moment. I live alone in a 5-year-old single-family home I purchased. With a standard 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, I own one 10-year-old senior rescue cat named Simba who sleeps nearly all day long and only moves for wet food, sunlight, and occasional gentle head scratches. I have no kids, no roommates, no loud friends, no chaotic family drama, no risky hobbies, no side hustles, no travel obsessions, no quirky habits, and no unusual lifestyle choices whatsoever. My daily routine is so rigidly consistent it could be copied and pasted day after day with zero change. I wake up at exactly 6:40 every single weekday morning. I swing my legs over the bed, stretch, walk downstairs, brew a simple black coffee with a single splash of almond milk, eat a prepackaged oatmeal bar for breakfast, brush my teeth, get dressed in neutral comfortable work clothes, log into my work computer at 8 a.m. sharp, work steadily through my task list until noon, take a 30-minute silent lunch break alone in my kitchen, resume work until 5 p.m. on the dot, log off immediately without overtime, walk one single lap around my neighborhood block for light exercise, return home, cook a simple dinner of grilled chicken, pasta, or frozen vegetable bowls, watch 2 casual episodes of a light-hearted streaming show, perform 10 minutes of minor household tidying, and go to bed before 11 o'clock to repeat the exact same cycle all over again the next day. I have lived this identical routine for multiple years in a row with almost zero deviation. I am the definition of average, ordinary, mundane, normal American adult life, the kind of person strangers pass in parking lots and instantly forget, the kind of neighbor who never causes trouble, never hosts gatherings, never files complaints, never draws attention, and never experiences anything even slightly out of the ordinary. For years I truly believed that my life was far too plain, too stable, too routine-driven to ever encounter chaos, weirdness, viral-worthy moments, bizarre neighbor encounters, random animal incidents, bureaucratic mix-ups, or any of the absurd unscripted drama you see online or in movies. I thought weird days only happen to people who live in big cities, seek adventure, surround themselves with chaotic people, or make risky spontaneous choices, not quiet rule-following suburban people who mind their own business and stick to the schedule every single day. But one completely ordinary, unassuming, generic spring Thursday shattered every single one of those beliefs and revealed the most underrated, unspoken truth about modern American suburban life. The most chaotic, bizarre, hilarious, unbelievable days do not come from big events or bold choices. They come from perfectly normal days where absolutely nothing is supposed to happen, where a perfect storm of tiny, unrelated, random, unforeseeable suburban mishaps collide all at once on a regular person's doorstep, spiraling into a 12-hour chain reaction of pure everyday absurdity so layered and ridiculous it sounds entirely fictional, even though every single moment is 100% real, unexaggerated, and authentic to the weird, overregulated, gossip-fueled, poorly coordinated ecosystem of American suburban community living. This entire story is one single unbroken paragraph professionally paced for a full 60-minute English voiceover narration, with smooth, natural American conversational rhythm, consistent flow, no abrupt jumps, no missing context, rich everyday detail and gradual plot progression designed specifically for long-form dubbing, clocking in at approximately 30,000 words of continuous narrative capturing every single strange, funny, frustrating, and unforgettable moment of my most impossibly chaotic normal day. It all began exactly like every other morning in my life, quiet, mild, slightly humid, with soft spring sunlight filtering through new green tree leaves, pollen dusting every car and sidewalk in the neighborhood, birds chirping steadily in every backyard tree, and the distant faint hum of far-off highway traffic barely audible over the peaceful suburban silence. My phone alarm sounded promptly at 6:40 a.m. I woke up feeling groggy but completely routine-oriented, no premonitions, no strange feelings, no hint that today would be different from any other day. I swung my legs over the mattress, slipped on my house slippers, and walked slowly down the carpeted hallway toward the stairs. My cat Simba curled up sound asleep on the upper hallway windowsill, exactly where he spends every single morning. I descended the stairs, flipped on the kitchen overhead light, and began my standard morning coffee ritual without a single thought of deviation. I filled the coffee maker reservoir with clean filtered tap water, inserted a fresh paper filter, poured in my usual medium roast coffee grounds, and pressed the brew button, listening to the familiar gentle gurgle and drip that marks the official start of every weekday. I walked over to Simba's feeding station on the kitchen floor, cleaned out his leftover dry kibble from the night before, refilled his water bowl with fresh cold water, and set down a portion of his senior cat wet food, watching as he slowly stretched, yawned, and padded lazily down the hallway to eat. Everything was textbook normal, perfectly calm, entirely unremarkable in every possible way. I pulled out my phone while waiting for my coffee to finish brewing, scanned through my notifications, found 0 overnight messages, 0 work emergencies, 0 neighborhood alerts, 0 delivery updates, 0 reminders, 0 scheduled appointments, nothing at all to indicate any upcoming change or disruption to my routine. I sipped my coffee once it finished brewing, leaned against the kitchen counter for a quiet moment, and mentally reviewed my standard Thursday schedule. Work all day, finish reports, attend one short virtual team meeting, take a walk after work, cook dinner, clean lightly, relax, go to bed. An entirely uneventful, predictable, boring schedule in every sense of the word. I finished my coffee, showered quickly, dressed in my usual neutral work attire, dried my hair, and returned to the kitchen at 7:25 a.m., fully ready to begin another identical workday. And it was at this precise moment that the first tiny, innocent-looking crack in my perfect routine appeared. A small oddity so minor I almost overlooked it entirely, unaware it was the first domino in an endless 12-hour chain of suburban chaos that would completely consume my entire day. As I glanced out my front living room window to check the morning weather, I noticed a single bright yellow caution tape strip strung loosely across the lower section of my front yard oak tree, taped lightly around the trunk with no visible stakes, no signs, no barriers, no explanation, just one random strip of yellow construction-style caution tape fluttering gently in the breeze on my completely undamaged, perfectly healthy neighborhood tree. I blinked in confusion, scanned my entire front yard, the neighboring yards on both sides, the street, the sidewalk, and the entire surrounding block, searching for any sign of construction, utility work, tree trimming, city maintenance, or neighborhood projects, but there was absolutely nothing out of place, no workers, no trucks, no equipment, no barriers, no warning signs, no ongoing projects of any kind anywhere nearby. It was just one single unexplained strip of caution tape on my tree and nothing else. I assumed it was a silly late-night kid prank from the neighborhood, a harmless, meaningless joke I could easily remove in 2 seconds before starting work. I unlocked my front door, stepped out onto the porch, and walked across my lawn to peel off the tape, ready to dispose of it and erase the only oddity of my morning. But the second I reached the tree and lifted my hand toward the tape, I heard a soft, repetitive, high-pitched buzzing sound directly above my head. A steady, consistent insect buzz that was not typical for early spring mornings in my area. I tilted my head upward and squinted into the thick upper branches of the oak tree, and my stomach immediately dropped into pure disbelief. Tucked perfectly into the dense upper canopy of my front yard tree, hidden from ground-level view until you stood directly beneath it, was a fully established, active paper wasp nest, medium-sized, teardrop-shaped, gray and papery, covered in live wasps slowly circling and crawling across the surface, an active stinging insect nest that had been built overnight in my personal front yard tree. The random caution tape was not a prank at all. It had been placed by an anonymous, early morning passerby or off-duty city worker to warn residents of the hidden wasp nest before anyone accidentally walked beneath the branches and risked stings. I froze instantly, stepping slowly backward away from the tree, heart racing slightly, realizing I had woken up to an active stinging insect hazard directly above my front lawn with 0 warning, 0 notification, and 0 prior knowledge. I had lived in this house for years, walked beneath this tree every single day, mowed the lawn beneath it weekly, and had never once seen a single wasp or nest in the branches. It had appeared completely overnight, undetected and fully formed. I quickly retreated back into my house, closed and locked the front door, and pulled out my phone to research local wasp removal services, planning to schedule a professional same-day removal to eliminate the hazard before it grew larger or became more aggressive. I found 3 highly rated local pest control companies available for emergency residential removal. Called the first one on my list, explained the active front yard wasp nest situation, and scheduled a technician to arrive between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. that morning to safely remove and dispose of the nest. Feeling relieved that the problem was minor, temporary, and easily fixable with a single professional visit, I reassured myself that this was just a small random household inconvenience, nothing more than a minor morning disruption, and once the nest was removed, my day would return to normal routine for the rest of the afternoon and evening. I had absolutely no idea that this tiny wasp nest incident was only the extremely mild opening chapter of the most absurd, layered, non-stop chaotic day of my entire adult life. I logged into work promptly at 8 a.m., opened my daily task queue, pulled up my pending billing review spreadsheets, replied to overnight client emails, and settled into my usual remote work rhythm, managing to work completely uninterrupted for exactly 52 minutes. A brief stretch of pure normalcy that tricked me into thinking the rest of the day would remain calm at 8:52 a.m. Exactly 8 minutes before my scheduled pest control technician window opened, my doorbell rang loudly and continuously, followed by rapid, insistent knocking on my front door. Far more urgent and persistent than a standard service worker arrival, I muted my work microphone, paused my spreadsheet work, and walked quickly to the front door. Assuming it was the early arriving pest control technician ready to inspect the wasp nest, I pulled open the front door and was greeted not by a pest control worker in uniform, but by a flustered, apologetic middle-aged woman wearing a bright green Neighborhood Association volunteer vest. Clutching a large printed neighborhood map and a stack of official HOA notification flyers, her face full of embarrassment and panic, she immediately introduced herself as our neighborhood's quarterly landscape audit volunteer coordinator, and began explaining a catastrophic last-minute scheduling mix-up that no one in the HOA leadership had caught until that very morning. She told me that the HOA had scheduled a mandatory neighborhood-wide tree health inspection and spring landscape audit for that exact morning. Every property on the block was required to be inspected for overgrown branches, dead foliage, pest infestations, and unapproved yard debris, and due to a clerical error in the HOA scheduling spreadsheet, my home address had been marked as the official central check-in and command hub for the entire inspection team, meaning all 14 volunteer inspectors were instructed to assemble on my front lawn at 9 a.m. sharp to receive their assigned neighborhood zones, inspection checklists, and team assignments before beginning the block-wide audit. She explained that the error had gone unnoticed because the HOA president had forgotten to send the final reminder email. No neighbors were notified of the last-minute hub location change, and no one had asked my permission to use my private residential lawn as the official neighborhood inspection headquarters for the entire morning. I stood there stunned, processing the impossible timing of the situation. I had an active wasp nest in my front yard tree, a scheduled pest control visit arriving within minutes to remove a stinging insect hazard, and now an entire team of 14 HOA volunteer inspectors was about to set up a full outdoor community operation directly on my hazard-marked lawn with zero prior warning or consent. Within seconds of finishing her explanation, I watched 14 volunteers walking in a group down my street directly toward my house, all carrying clipboards, inspection checklists, measuring tapes, pruning shears, and landscape assessment forms, fully prepared to spread out across my lawn and begin their official neighborhood audit procedures. I quickly pulled the volunteer coordinator aside and explained the entire wasp nest emergency, pointing up at the hidden nest in the tree, showing her my scheduled pest control confirmation text, and explaining that my front yard was currently an active pest hazard zone that could not safely host foot traffic, groups, or equipment for the next hour. Her face turned pale with embarrassment as she realized the double disaster of the scheduling conflict. The entire volunteer team froze in place on my sidewalk, unsure whether to proceed, relocate, or reschedule, stuck in a no-win bureaucratic conflict between mandatory quarterly HOA landscape inspection deadlines and legitimate residential pest safety hazards, feeling guilty for derailing an entire neighborhood volunteer event through no fault of my own. I quickly brainstormed a compromise solution. I told the team they could set up their check-in station on my concrete front porch, fully 10 feet away from the wasp tree and completely outside the hazard zone, allowing them to complete their mandatory check-in process, distribute assignments, and begin their neighborhood inspection without violating safety rules or missing their official deadline. The entire team exhaled in collective relief, thanking me repeatedly for my flexibility and willingness to host their last-minute displaced headquarters, and they immediately began setting up folding tables, clipboards, and inspection materials across my front porch while I returned to my work desk to continue my remote job duties. Suddenly hosting an official neighborhood HOA landscape audit operation directly outside my home office window while trying to complete professional billing work for my full-time job. Over the next hour, my normally quiet front porch turned into a constant bustling hub of neighborhood activity. Volunteers cycled in and out every few minutes to turn in zone reports, ask questions, and collect new paperwork. Local neighbors stopped by continuously to speak with inspectors about their own yard concerns. Impromptu mini-meetings broke out on my porch steps, and multiple curious residents lingered in my front yard chatting about the unexpected volunteer hub setup, all while I sat indoors, participating in virtual work meetings, typing official reports, and answering client calls, balancing a full corporate workload with an unplanned neighborhood community event entirely by accident. Right as the HOA team finished their final check-in rotations and prepared to fully disperse across the neighborhood for their block walkthrough, my scheduled pest control technician arrived in his branded service truck, pulling up directly in front of my house. He stepped out in full protective gear, inspected the wasp nest quickly, confirmed it was an active paper wasp colony requiring immediate professional removal, and explained that he would need full unobstructed access to my front lawn and tree area for approximately 20 minutes to safely treat, remove, and dispose of the nest completely, creating yet another immediate conflict with the lingering HOA volunteer activity on my property. The HOA coordinator and pest control technician quickly coordinated a temporary zone clearance. All volunteers stepped back from the front yard area, and the technician proceeded with his safe removal process while I watched from my window, finally resolving the morning pest hazard after an hour of layered chaos. Once the nest was fully removed, treated, and disposed of, the technician inspected the entire tree for additional hidden hives, confirmed my yard was completely safe and pest-free, handed me his official service receipt, and departed, leaving my property hazard-free at long last. The HOA team finished their final porch paperwork minutes afterward, packed up all their equipment, apologized one final time for the massive unplanned disruption to my morning routine, and dispersed across the neighborhood to complete their scheduled landscape audit. Finally leaving my house quiet and empty for the first time since early morning, I sank back into my desk chair, exhausted and bewildered, staring out my window at my now normal lawn, amazed at how many layered, unrelated, unplanned disruptions had stacked up before 10:30 a.m. I had dealt with a sudden overnight wasp nest hazard, an emergency pest control appointment, an unplanned neighborhood HOA headquarters takeover, a full morning of impromptu community hosting and constant external distractions while still maintaining perfect work attendance and completing all my required morning job tasks on schedule. I genuinely believe that the worst of my chaotic day was fully behind me, that the universe had exhausted every possible morning disruption, and that the rest of my Thursday would settle back into calm, predictable, ordinary routine. I was completely and utterly wrong at 11:15 a.m. Just as I was regaining my work rhythm and finalizing my mid-morning billing reports, I heard a loud, repetitive, panicked bleating sound coming from my fully fenced private backyard, a high-pitched, frantic animal noise I had never once heard in my residential neighborhood in years of living here. Confused and alarmed, I muted my work audio, stood up, and hurried toward the back of my house to investigate the strange noise. I pulled back the sliding glass door curtain and peered out into my quiet, well-maintained backyard, and what I saw stopped me completely in my tracks. Standing perfectly still in the center of my green backyard lawn, staring directly at my back window with wide, skittish eyes, was a small, fluffy, white juvenile goat, a young baby goat with soft woolly fur, tiny hooves, and a faint pink collar around its neck, bleating nervously every few seconds as it wandered slowly across my grass, sniffing my flower beds and investigating my patio furniture in pure confusion. I stood frozen in total disbelief for a full 10 seconds, struggling to process the impossibility of the scene unfolding in my backyard. My neighborhood is a dense, strictly zoned residential subdivision with 0 agricultural zoning, 0 farms, 0 livestock permits, 0 rural properties within an 8-mile radius. Domestic goats are completely prohibited in residential yards per county code, and there is absolutely no logical reason a young pet goat would be wandering loose inside my fully locked 6-foot privacy-fenced suburban backyard in the middle of a weekday workday. I slowly slid open the back door a small safe crack to avoid startling the skittish young goat. Observing its behavior carefully, it was clearly a well-cared-for domestic pet, clean, healthy, well-fed, gentle and non-aggressive, just extremely lost, confused and far from home. I immediately began inspecting my entire fence line inch by inch to discover how the goat had infiltrated my fully secured backyard, and after several minutes of careful checking, I found a tiny, hidden gap beneath the bottom fence rail in the far rear corner of my yard, a small ground-level opening created by minor soil erosion over time, just large enough for a small young goat to squeeze through undetected. A tiny structural flaw I had never noticed during years of regular yard maintenance. I quickly blocked the gap with heavy concrete landscape blocks to prevent the goat from escaping into the neighborhood streets or wandering into other residents' yards, then retreated indoors to grab fresh water and a small handful of grass hay I keep for occasional stray wildlife visitors, placing the supplies safely on my backyard patio to keep the nervous young goat calm and comfortable while I worked to locate its owner. I immediately posted clear photos, a detailed description, and my exact home address in every local neighborhood Facebook group, County Lost and Found pet page, local community bulletin board and suburban resident chat group, explaining that a lost juvenile white pet goat was safely contained in my backyard, and asking all local residents to share the post to help reunite the animal with its owner quickly. Within minutes, my posts exploded with hundreds of likes, shares, and hilarious shocked comments from local residents, every single neighbor expressing complete bewilderment at a suburban goat sighting in our non-agricultural neighborhood. Dozens of people joking that my already chaotic morning had officially become the most legendary local neighborhood story of the entire year, multiple long-term residents commenting that in 20 years of living here, they had never once seen a goat within subdivision boundaries. My random backyard goat sighting instantly became a local viral community moment. While waiting for owner responses, I continued monitoring the goat's behavior from my window, ensuring it remained safe, calm, and contained within my fenced yard. all while continuing to answer work emails, update billing spreadsheets, and participate in passive work chat conversations, somehow balancing lost livestock rescue duties with full-time corporate remote work responsibilities. 20 minutes after posting my lost goat alert, I received a frantic, tearful private message from a teenage girl who lived 3 subdivisions away, explaining that the young goat was her family's beloved pet named Snowy. Their family owned a small hobby farm on the absolute outer edge of the county, several miles away from my neighborhood, and Snowy had escaped overnight. Through an open pasture gate, wandered for miles through residential street corridors, navigated multiple busy road crossings, and somehow squeezed through the tiny hidden fence gap into my backyard early that morning. She explained that her family had spent the entire previous night and early morning searching frantically for their missing goat, terrified they would never find her alive, and they were endlessly grateful for my careful containment and quick community alert posts. The girl and her parents rushed to my house within 10 minutes of messaging me. Arriving with a portable livestock travel pen and gentle handling supplies, they were incredibly apologetic for the massive unexpected disruption to my day, repeatedly thanking me for keeping their scared young pet safe, contained and comfortable during her long-lost adventure. As they gently guided Snowy back into their travel pen, the goat's mother and older sibling were waiting calmly in their vehicle, creating a sweet, heartwarming reunion scene in my front yard that multiple passing neighbors stopped to watch and photograph. Before leaving, the family insisted on gifting me a large basket of homemade fresh farm eggs, handcrafted honey jars, and homemade baked bread as a sincere token of their gratitude for my kindness and quick action. They apologized again for the bizarre once-in-a-lifetime suburban goat escape that had landed directly in my ordinary backyard on my ordinary weekday. Once the family and their pet goat departed, my yard finally returned to quiet normalcy, and I glanced at the clock to discover it was only 12:15 p.m. Barely past lunchtime, and I had already survived a hidden overnight wasp nest, emergency pest control service, full HO neighborhood inspection headquarters takeover, and viral suburban lost goat rescue. All before the official halfway point of my workday. I shook my head in pure disbelief, amazed at how many completely unrelated, impossible, absurd events had stacked onto one single ordinary Thursday morning. I took my 30-minute lunch break in complete silence, sitting on my front porch, alone, laughing quietly to myself at the sheer ridiculousness of my day so far. Fully convinced that absolutely nothing else could possibly go wrong or get any weirder for the remainder of the day, I truly believed the chaos was finished, that the afternoon would be smooth, calm, and routine. I could not have been more spectacularly wrong. Immediately after finishing my lunch break and resuming my afternoon work tasks at 12:45 p.m., I walked into my downstairs bathroom to wash my hands and discovered slow, steady water seeping out from beneath the base of my toilet, a subtle but persistent bathroom leak spreading across the vinyl floor. I knelt down to inspect the base seal, and within seconds of observation, the leak accelerated rapidly, turning from a slow seep into a steady streaming flow of clear water flooding outward across my bathroom floor. I instantly recognized the issue as a complete toilet base seal failure, a plumbing emergency requiring immediate professional repair to prevent water damage. I rushed to my basement utility closet, located my main home water shutoff valve, and turned off the entire residential water supply to stop the flooding, successfully preventing major structural damage but cutting off all running water to my entire house for the rest of the day. I immediately contacted my trusted local plumbing company to schedule emergency same-day repair service, only to be informed that every local plumber in the entire county was completely booked solid for the day due to a midweek surge in household plumbing failures, with no available technician openings until the following morning, leaving me stuck with zero running water for my entire home for the entire afternoon, evening, and overnight hours, adding a full household plumbing emergency and total water outage to my ever-growing list of daily suburban disasters. Undeterred by yet another unplanned crisis, I adapted quickly to the water outage, using stored bottled water for basic hand hygiene, teeth brushing, and minimal cleaning needs, and continued powering through my full afternoon workload with zero further delays or interruptions. I completed all remaining billing reviews, finished my monthly progress report, submitted all required client documentation, and attended my final afternoon virtual team meeting with perfect professionalism, never once falling behind on work despite my morning chaos and ongoing household emergency. I logged off work promptly at 5 p.m. sharp, officially concluding my full workday with all tasks completed on time and all professional obligations fully fulfilled. Despite the 12 straight hours of layered suburban chaos I had endured, after logging off work, I finally allowed myself to fully process the unbelievable sequence of events that had transformed my perfectly ordinary Thursday into an all-day suburban spectacle. I had woken up for a routine workday and endured an overnight hidden wasp nest hazard emergency pest control removal, unplanned HOA neighborhood inspection headquarters takeover, viral suburban pet goat rescue, and complete household water outage due to sudden plumbing failure. Every single event entirely unrelated, completely random, and utterly unforeseeable. Every single disaster striking a normal, routine-following person simply trying to live a quiet, ordinary life. As the sun slowly set over my quiet subdivision, I walked around my now peaceful lawn, observing the clean, pest-free tree, the empty, quiet porch, the secured backyard fence, and the silent exterior of my home, reflecting deeply on the profound, hilarious, eye-opening truth about everyday American suburban life revealed by this impossibly chaotic day. People who live ordinary, boring, routine-driven middle-class suburban lives often mistakenly believe their days are uneventful, uninteresting, and lacking story. But the reality is that suburban normalcy is nothing more than a fragile temporary illusion, held together by constant invisible coordination, anonymous neighbor inaction, bureaucratic luck, stable household systems, and unbroken routine. The second any single one of those invisible factors shifts, ordinary days instantly spiral into unforgettable chaos. The most entertaining, hilarious, unique, and authentic stories of modern American life do not come from travel, adventure, wealth, fame, drama, or risk-taking behavior. They come from regular, hard-working, ordinary citizens simply trying to live quiet, responsible, stable lives, getting caught in perfect storms of tiny, unrelated suburban mishaps that stack together to create pure unscripted comedy no writer could ever invent. Over the course of the evening, multiple neighbors stopped by my porch to chat and laugh about my legendary chaotic Thursday, many of them following my goat rescue and HOA mix-up updates all day in the neighborhood groups, joking that my house had officially become the neighborhood's unofficial chaos headquarters, and that no other home in the subdivision could pack so many unrelated bizarre events into a single ordinary weekday. I spent my water-free evening eating a simple cold pre-made dinner, tidying my quiet house, and relaxing with my completely unfazed senior cat Simba, finally able to unwind after 12 straight hours of non-stop unexpected suburban drama. By the time I climbed into bed at 11 p.m. that night, exhausted but endlessly amused and grateful that all crises had resolved safely without injury, damage, or serious inconvenience, I knew I would never again take my quiet, ordinary, routine suburban days for granted. I learned beyond any doubt that in the quiet, picket-fenced, rule-regulated neighborhoods that define mainstream everyday American life, normalcy is never permanent, calm is never guaranteed, and the most memorable life stories always emerge not from extraordinary circumstances but from the utterly bizarre, perfectly timed, one-of-a-kind chaos that randomly chooses ordinary people on completely ordinary days, making even the most average American suburban life infinitely interesting, unpredictable, and full of wonderfully weird, unforgettable everyday adventure. I'm just a regular ordinary American guy living in a typical middle-class suburban neighborhood in North Carolina, the kind of quiet, unassuming subdivision where every house looks almost identical, where lawns are either perfectly manicured or quietly struggling through the summer heat, where neighbors wave when they pass each other on the street but rarely stop to talk deeply, where the local HOA keeps a casual but watchful eye on front yard appearances, where the biggest weekly news is someone putting up a new patio, a stray deer wandering through the cul-de-sac, or the local grocery store running a special on barbecue sauce and sweet tea, and where life is supposed to be predictable, calm, repetitive, and thoroughly normal in every single way that defines average modern American suburban existence. I'm 35 years old. I work a standard full-time office job at a local business administration firm in the nearest small city, commuting 20 minutes each way every weekday morning and evening, clocking in at 8 sharp and clocking out at 5 without overtime, without drama, without high pressure, without any glamorous or exciting responsibilities, spending most of my workdays replying to routine emails, organizing client files, updating standard reports, attending brief team check-ins, and completing the kind of generic administrative tasks that thousands and thousands of ordinary working Americans do every single day just to pay the bills, keep health insurance, cover my mortgage, afford my car payment, and maintain a stable, quiet, uneventful life. I live alone in a 3-bedroom single-family home I bought 4 years ago. I have one elderly rescue cat named Luna who sleeps roughly 20 hours a day and only moves for food and sunlight. I follow the exact same daily routine almost every day of the year. Wake up at 6:45, brush my teeth, wash my face, make a pot of simple black coffee, eat a quick breakfast of cereal or toast, get dressed in casual business clothes, grab my keys and laptop bag, drive to work, eat lunch alone at a nearby sandwich shop or from a meal prep container, drive home at the end of the workday, walk around the block for light exercise, cook a simple dinner, watch a couple episodes of a casual streaming show, do minimal light housework, and go to bed before 11 o'clock to repeat the entire cycle all over again the next morning. I have no extreme hobbies, no risky side hustles, no wild friend group, no dramatic family conflicts, no crazy travel habits, no unusual addictions or eccentricities. I am literally the definition of a boring, average, run-of-the-mill American civilian, the kind of person strangers see and immediately forget, the kind of neighbor who never causes trouble, never draws attention, never gets involved in local drama, and never expects anything weird or out of the ordinary to happen in their daily life. For years I genuinely believed my life was so standard, so formulaic, so monotonously normal that nothing surprising, chaotic, bizarre, or memorable could ever happen to me. I thought weird, dramatic, hilarious, life-interrupting events only happen to people in movies, social media, viral videos, big cities, or chaotic friend groups, not to regular, quiet, rule-following suburban guys like me just trying to get through each workweek peacefully. That belief was completely and utterly destroyed on one random, unremarkable, totally ordinary Thursday in early spring. A day that started so normally it could have been copied and pasted from any other weekday in my adult life, and slowly, steadily, absurdly unraveled into a 12-hour sequence of overlapping, ridiculous, unbelievable, yet 100% real suburban mishaps, neighbor misunderstandings, random animal encounters, incompetent local service errors, petty community drama, and pure small-town American chaos so layered and bizarre it sounds entirely fictional, even though every single moment happened exactly as I'm describing it, with zero exaggeration, zero dramatization, zero creative embellishment, and zero logical explanation for why so many unrelated, stupid, funny, infuriating things all decided to happen to the same regular guy on the same completely ordinary day. This entire story is one continuous unbroken narrative, designed specifically for a full 1-hour English voiceover recording, paced naturally for human-speaking rhythm, filled with authentic American suburban details, realistic local personalities, everyday dialogue, and the kind of mundane yet shockingly weird chaos that only regular everyday American life can produce, and by the end of this day, I would learn the greatest unspoken truth about modern suburban life in the United States: normal days in America are never truly normal, and the most memorable, hilarious, absurd stories don't come from adventure or travel or big moments. They come from totally regular people living totally regular lives, getting caught in perfect storms of tiny, stupid, unrelated suburban disasters that stack up one after another until a boring weekday turns into the most chaotic day of your entire year. It all began at 6:45 in the morning, my usual wake-up time, when my phone alarm went off exactly on schedule, and I rolled out of bed just like I did every other morning, feeling groggy but routine-oriented, ready to start another identical workday. The weather was classic North Carolina spring. Mild, humid, slightly overcast, with soft breezes blowing through the tree branches lining my street, pollen dusting every car and sidewalk in the neighborhood, birds chirping loudly in every backyard tree, and the quiet distant hum of early morning traffic from the main road a mile away. I stretched, slipped on my house shoes, walked down the hallway and downstairs into my kitchen, flipped on the overhead light, and started my standard morning routine without a single thought that today would be different from any other day. I filled the coffee maker with water, inserted a fresh filter, poured in my usual medium roast coffee grounds, pressed the brew button, and listened to the familiar gurgle and drip that signaled my morning caffeine was on the way. I walked over to Luna's food and water stations, refilled her water bowl completely, dumped out her old dry food and poured fresh kibble into her dish, and glanced around my quiet, empty house, feeling completely calm and totally unbothered, ready to tackle another simple, straightforward workday. That was when the first tiny crack in my normal routine appeared, subtle enough that I almost ignored it entirely. Through my kitchen window, I noticed something strange sitting in the exact center of my front lawn, something that had absolutely no business being there overnight. At first glance it looked like a large, thick, brightly colored handmade welcome mat, the kind people place on their front porch, but this was sitting directly in the middle of my green grass, perfectly flat, perfectly centered, like someone had carefully placed it there while I slept. I walked closer to the window, squinted through the morning haze, and realized it was not a welcome mat at all. It was a giant hand-painted neighborhood campaign sign, roughly 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall, with bright blue and red spray paint lettering that read, "Support local street cleanup. Volunteers needed today," along with a handwritten phone number, and a messy signature from the Neighborhood Community Action Team. I immediately froze, confused and slightly annoyed, because I had never agreed to host any neighborhood signs on my property, had never received any messages, emails, flyers, or door knocks about a street cleanup event, and had never given anyone permission to place large campaign signage on my private front lawn. My neighborhood does occasional community cleanups a few times a year, but they always notify residents weeks in advance, post schedules in the neighborhood Facebook group, leave printed flyers on doorsteps, and coordinate with the HOA to place signs only at street entrances and community common areas, never randomly on private resident lawns without consent. I walked outside onto my front porch in my pajamas to get a better look, and as I approached the sign, I noticed something even stranger. Taped to the back of the large wooden sign was a crumpled handwritten note scrawled in bright pink marker that said, "Thanks for donating your lawn as our main volunteer check-in spot. See you at 7 a.m. sharp." I stood there staring at the note in pure disbelief, realizing that some unknown neighborhood volunteer group had arbitrarily selected my house as the official headquarters for their entire morning street cleanup event, had placed a massive unapproved sign directly in the center of my yard overnight, and fully expected me to host dozens of random neighborhood strangers on my property starting in just 15 minutes, with absolutely zero prior warning or permission from me whatsoever. I immediately pulled out my phone, opened the neighborhood Facebook group, scrolled through every recent post, checked my message requests, my email inbox, my text messages, and my HOA notification alerts, searching frantically for any mention of a street cleanup happening that morning, and found absolutely nothing. There were no posts, no reminders, no event listings, no discussions, no notifications of any kind. This group had simply decided overnight that my house would be the perfect host site for their volunteer event, and had set everything up without telling the homeowner at all. Slightly irritated but still trying to stay calm and rational, I thought to myself it was just a simple community mix-up, that I could quickly remove the sign before anyone showed up, go back inside, finish my morning routine and head to work like normal, and the whole weird incident would be over before it even began. I walked back inside to grab scissors to cut the tape off the note and carry the sign to my garage for storage, but before I could even close the front door, I heard the first sound of incoming chaos. The distant rumble of multiple cars slowing down on my street, followed by the sound of car doors opening and closing, followed by voices, dozens of voices all growing closer to my front yard. By 6:58 a.m., just 2 minutes before 7 o'clock, a full crowd of neighborhood volunteers had already arrived on my lawn, carrying trash grabbers, garbage bags, work gloves, rolling trash bins, and portable folding tables, already setting up their entire volunteer operation directly on my private property like this was a pre-approved city-owned community zone, and not my personal residential front yard where I pay thousands of dollars in annual property taxes. There were roughly 25 to 30 people of all ages, teenagers, adults, and even a few retired seniors all chatting cheerfully, organizing into teams, dividing up cleanup zones, and arranging their supplies across my grass, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the shocked, unconsenting homeowner standing on my own porch in my pajamas watching them take over my entire front yard. A bubbly, energetic woman in her 40s wearing a bright yellow volunteer vest immediately marched up to my porch, extended her hand for a friendly handshake, and greeted me like we were old friends, saying, "Good morning. Thanks so much for hosting us today. We really appreciate you opening up your home for our community cleanup headquarters." Still half asleep and utterly stunned by the entire situation, I shook her hand out of pure social reflex before I managed to find words and explain that I had absolutely no idea there was a cleanup event happening today, that I had never agreed to host anything, that no one had notified me, and that I was scheduled to leave for work in 10 minutes with no ability to host a neighborhood volunteer event on my lawn all morning. Her face immediately dropped into pure shock and panic, and she pulled out her phone to check her event notes, quickly realizing the catastrophic miscommunication. The neighborhood volunteer coordinator had mistakenly written down my address instead of the community park address when assigning the host location, had placed all the signage overnight at the wrong house, and had forgotten to send out the official event reminder email to the entire neighborhood group entirely. She was incredibly embarrassed and profusely apologetic, repeatedly saying how terrible the mistake was and how they would immediately start packing everything up to move to the correct location at the neighborhood park. But there was one huge problem. All the volunteer teams were already fully assembled, the entire morning schedule was locked in, many volunteers had taken time off work specifically for this cleanup, and moving the entire setup would take at least an hour and ruin the whole morning's planned community service project. Caught completely off guard by her genuine panic and the crowd of well-meaning confused volunteers standing on my lawn, I sighed and reluctantly agreed to let them stay set up on my front yard for the next 2 hours to finish their street cleanup, simply because I didn't want to be the guy who ruined an entire neighborhood community service event for dozens of people who had woken up early to volunteer for a good cause. I told them they could use my lawn as their check-in zone, just as long as they cleaned up completely afterward, left no trash or supplies behind, and finished up before 9 o'clock so my yard would be clear and normal again by the time I returned home from work. The volunteer director thanked me endlessly, turned back to the crowd, and announced that we were officially set for the cleanup, and within seconds, the entire group scattered down the street to start picking up litter, leaving only 3 volunteer organizers behind on my lawn to manage check-ins and supply distribution. I quickly rushed back inside, finished getting dressed for work in record time, chugged my coffee, grabbed my lunch bag and laptop, and prepared to leave for the office, thinking that even though my morning had gotten weirdly derailed, the worst of the chaos was already over and I could still salvage most of my workday. I had absolutely no idea that this was only the extremely mild opening chapter of the most chaotic day of my entire life. As I walked out to my driveway to get into my car, I froze again, encountering the second bizarre problem of the morning. Overnight, during the setup of the volunteer cleanup sign, someone had accidentally blocked my entire driveway entrance with 3 large heavy-duty plastic rolling trash bins full of extra supplies, and they had parked 1 volunteer pickup truck directly behind my car, completely boxing my vehicle in with 0 possible way to exit my driveway. There was no space to maneuver, no alternative exit, no way to drive forward or backward, and the truck blocking me was unattended, its driver already out on the street cleaning up litter with the other volunteers. I scanned the entire neighborhood street looking for the truck's owner, but every single volunteer was spread out down the road, too far away to hear me calling, and I had no way to contact anyone to move the vehicle. I was officially trapped in my own driveway, unable to leave my own property, running late for work, stuck hosting a random neighborhood volunteer event on my lawn, and completely powerless to fix any of it quickly. I immediately pulled out my phone, texted my boss a long, detailed, slightly embarrassed explanation of the insane neighborhood mix-up that was preventing me from arriving at the office on time, explained I was completely blocked in and dealing with an unplanned community event takeover of my yard, and asked if I could work remotely from home for the first half of the day until the cleanup finished and my driveway was clear. My boss, who is used to mundane office problems and almost never hears stories of suburban community chaos, replied almost instantly with a string of laughing emojis, telling me to take care of the situation and log on remotely as soon as I could, absolutely blown away by the absurdity of my morning predicament. Now officially stuck working from home unexpectedly, I dragged my laptop back to my dining room table, set up my remote workstation, and tried to focus on my morning meetings and emails while simultaneously monitoring the volunteer activity happening directly outside my front windows. For the next hour, I alternated between answering work calls and watching dozens of strangers come and go across my front lawn, checking in for their volunteer shifts, grabbing supplies, and chatting with each other, all completely unaware that they were invading a private homeowner's property due to a massive organizational mistake. Just as I was finally settling into my remote work rhythm and starting to adjust to the weird lawn chaos outside, the third completely unrelated and utterly bizarre event of the day struck out of nowhere, shifting my chaotic morning from minor neighborhood inconvenience to straight-up surreal suburban absurdity. While I was sitting at my dining room table on a work call, I heard a loud, persistent, high-pitched honking sound coming from my fenced backyard, a sound I had never heard once in my 3 years living in this house. It was not a dog bark, not a bird chirp, not a squirrel chatter, not a car horn. It was the unmistakable, loud, repetitive honk of a domestic goose, loud enough to cut through my work call audio and make my cat Luna bolt under the couch in terror. I quickly muted my microphone, apologized to my team for the sudden background noise, and rushed to my back window to investigate, completely confused as to how a goose could possibly end up in my suburban residential backyard in the middle of a neighborhood cleanup event. When I pulled back the curtain and peered out at my backyard, I could not believe my eyes. Standing perfectly still in the center of my grass, staring directly at my back window with its head held high, was a full-grown adult white domestic goose, calm, unfazed, and completely at home on my lawn, honking softly every few seconds like it was politely demanding my attention. I stood there frozen for a solid 10 seconds, utterly baffled, because there are 0 ponds, lakes, farms, or waterfowl habitats within miles of my suburban neighborhood. Wild geese occasionally fly overhead in migration seasons, but they never land in tiny fenced residential backyards in the middle of a dense subdivision, and domestic pet geese almost never escape into suburban streets this far from rural areas. This goose was clean, well-fed, healthy, clearly someone's domestic pet, and it had somehow wandered into my fully fenced, locked backyard without leaving a single trace of how it got in. I slowly unlocked my back sliding door, stepped carefully onto my patio, and stared at the goose, which simply tilted its head and stared right back at me, completely fearless and totally comfortable in my yard. I did not own a goose, had never seen this goose before, had no idea where it came from, and had 0 clue how to catch it, contain it, or find its owner. I immediately pulled out my phone and posted an urgent photo in the neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "Found a loose domestic white goose in my locked backyard at 123 Oak Street. Completely healthy, very calm. Is this anyone's pet? Please message me immediately to claim your goose." Within 2 minutes, my post exploded with dozens of shocked, hilarious comments from neighbors, all saying they had never heard of anyone in the entire subdivision owning a pet goose, with multiple people joking that my chaotic morning had officially become the neighborhood's new favorite viral local story. While I was reading through the flood of funny neighbor comments and trying to figure out how to handle a random backyard goose during an unplanned neighborhood cleanup takeover, my doorbell started ringing nonstop, loud and frantic, followed by heavy, urgent knocking on my front door. Assuming it was one of the volunteer organizers needing help with supplies, I hurried to the front door and pulled it open, only to be greeted by a uniformed city animal control officer standing on my porch with a clipboard and official county tablet in hand, looking serious and professional. Before I could even greet him, he explained that a concerned anonymous neighbor had submitted an official emergency animal complaint to the county that morning, reporting that a local resident was illegally harboring dangerous exotic livestock animals on private residential property, hosting unauthorized community gatherings blocking public sidewalks, and operating an unlicensed outdoor community event without city permits, creating a public nuisance and safety hazard for the entire neighborhood. I stood there completely stunned as I processed his words, slowly realizing what had happened. Some nosy, overzealous neighbor had seen the massive volunteer crowd on my front lawn, seen my viral Facebook post about the backyard goose, combined the two completely innocent, unrelated events, and reported me to the county authorities for running an illegal unlicensed farm and public event out of my suburban residential home. I spent the next 45 minutes of my workday walking the animal control officer through every single chaotic detail of my insane morning, showing him proof of the volunteer group's address mix-up, letting him inspect my front yard to confirm it was just a community cleanup with no illegal activity, leading him out to my backyard to meet the very calm, very harmless lost pet goose, showing him my Facebook posts proving the goose was a lost stray I was trying to return to its owner, and explaining every layer of the perfect storm of suburban misfortune that had landed me with an official county complaint file on my record. The animal control officer, a middle-aged guy with a dry sense of humor who deals with ridiculous suburban complaints every single day, slowly relaxed his serious demeanor, started laughing at the sheer absurdity of my situation, admitted this was easily the most entertaining and ridiculous complaint he'd responded to all year, officially closed the case as completely unfounded, cleared my property of all nuisance allegations, and even stayed an extra 10 minutes to help me gently corral the goose into a safe fenced corner of my backyard, while we waited for the owner to come forward. He told me he'd worked animal control for 12 years, and had never seen a single suburban resident get accused of running an illegal farm solely from a community cleanup mix-up and a single lost pet goose, calling my day a masterclass in suburban bad luck and neighborhood gossip chaos. Right after the animal control officer left my house, I finally received a frantic private message reply to my Facebook goose post from a woman who lived 4 blocks down on Pine Avenue, a retired teacher who raised a small flock of domestic geese and chickens in her fully permitted backyard hobby farm enclosure, explaining that her oldest goose, Gabriel, had wandered out through a temporary gap in her fence that morning and had flown a short distance to my neighborhood, somehow landing directly in my locked backyard. She rushed over to my house within 5 minutes, absolutely mortified and endlessly apologetic, and explained that Gabriel was her friendly, adventurous escape artist goose who occasionally wandered off if a fence gap opened up. She brought me homemade chocolate chip cookies and a handwritten thank you card for taking such good care of her lost goose, gently guided Gabriel into her portable travel pen, and headed home, finally removing the bizarre backyard livestock crisis from my ever-growing list of morning disasters. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the neighborhood volunteer cleanup was finally finished. The organizers rushed over to my house to personally apologize one last time for the massive mix-up. Every single volunteer packed up all their supplies completely, cleaned my lawn spotless, removed the giant misprinted campaign sign, loaded all their equipment into their trucks, and cleared out entirely, finally freeing up my driveway and restoring my front yard to its normal quiet state. For the first time in 3 hours, my house was quiet, my yard was empty, no strangers were roaming my property, no county officials were investigating me, no random farm animals were living in my backyard, and I could finally breathe and focus entirely on finishing my work tasks peacefully. I logged back into my work system full-time, powered through my remaining morning reports, finished all my pending client updates, attended my final midday team meeting, and managed to catch up on all my delayed work just in time for my noon lunch break, feeling incredibly relieved that the worst of my chaotic day was officially behind me. I made myself a simple sandwich, poured a glass of sweet tea, sat down on my quiet front porch alone for the first time all morning, and laughed out loud at how utterly insane the past 4 hours had been, marveling at how a perfectly normal routine Thursday had spiraled into community event takeovers, driveway entrapment, stray pet geese, and official county animal control complaints, all before lunchtime. I genuinely believed that the universe had exhausted every possible chaotic mishap it could throw at me for the day, that the rest of my Thursday would be calm, quiet, and completely uneventful, allowing me to finish my workday peacefully and enjoy a normal evening at home. I was incredibly wrong. At exactly 1:15 p.m., right as I was resuming my afternoon work tasks, I heard a loud popping noise from my garage, followed by the sound of rushing water. Instantly suspicious after the morning's endless chaos, I walked quickly to my garage door, opened it up, and discovered my residential water heater had completely, catastrophically burst open, spraying hot water everywhere across my garage floor, flooding my storage shelves, soaking my outdoor equipment, and pooling rapidly across the concrete ground, creating a full garage flood in the middle of my workday. I immediately sprinted to my basement water shutoff valve and turned off the entire house water supply to stop the flooding, rushed back to the garage to assess the damage, and stared in horror at the massive mess spreading across my garage floor, realizing I now needed an emergency plumber to replace my broken water heater immediately, on top of all the other disasters I'd already survived that morning. I spent the next hour calling every local plumbing company in the area, begging for emergency same-day service, only to discover every single plumber in town was fully booked for the day with no available openings, leaving me stuck with a flooded garage, no running water in my entire house, and no way to fix the problem until the following day. I spent my entire afternoon mopping up garage floodwater, laying down towels and fans to dry the concrete, moving wet storage items outside to air dry, and salvaging whatever personal items I could from the flooding damage, all while still trying to complete my full-time remote work responsibilities on schedule. By 3:30 p.m., exhausted, stressed, and emotionally drained from 5 straight hours of nonstop chaos, I finally finished all my required work tasks, logged off my work computer early, and collapsed onto my couch in pure mental and physical exhaustion, completely stunned by how many completely unrelated, impossible, absurd disasters had stacked onto one single ordinary Thursday. I had started the day expecting a boring, routine workday and had instead endured a neighborhood volunteer group illegally taking over my lawn, being trapped in my own driveway, harboring a stray pet goose, getting reported to county animal control for running an illegal farm, dealing with a viral neighborhood Facebook spectacle, and suffering a catastrophic water heater failure and garage flood, all on the exact same day, with zero logical connection between any of the events. As the sun began to set and evening settled over my quiet neighborhood, I walked outside to finish drying my garage equipment, clean up the last of the flood mess, and enjoy the peaceful cool spring breeze, finally feeling like the day's chaos was fully finished. I cooked a simple cold dinner since I had no running water for cooking or cleaning, curled up on my couch with my cat Luna, turned on a relaxing movie, and tried my absolute hardest to unwind and forget the most chaotic ordinary day of my entire adult life. Before I could fully relax, I received one final hilarious cherry-on-top notification from the neighborhood Facebook group. The community volunteer coordinator had posted a public formal apology thread addressing the morning's massive event mix-up, explaining how they had accidentally taken over my private lawn, and dozens of neighbors had flooded the comment section with jokes about my legendary goose invasion, my fake illegal farm complaint, and my cursed chaotic Thursday, officially naming my house the most eventful address in the entire neighborhood, and declaring my ordinary boring weekday the neighborhood's official most dramatic local day of the year. As I read through the hundreds of funny neighbor comments, I couldn't help but smile and reflect deeply on the bizarre truth of everyday American suburban life. Normal people living normal lives in normal quiet neighborhoods never truly have normal days. The most interesting, funny, unforgettable stories don't come from vacations, adventures, big milestones, or dramatic emergencies. They come from regular people waking up for a regular workday, following every routine, minding their own business, living responsibly and quietly, and getting caught in once-in-a-lifetime perfect storms of tiny, ridiculous, unrelated suburban mishaps that stack together to create pure, unscripted, authentic chaos that no writer could ever invent. This is the hidden magic of ordinary American life. Behind every quiet suburban street, every routine work schedule, every average boring lifestyle, there is endless potential for weird, hilarious, unforgettable chaos, waiting patiently to turn a completely ordinary day into a legendary story you will retell for years and years. I went to bed that night exhausted, frazzled, and endlessly amused, knowing I would never again take my quiet, normal routine weekdays for granted, and fully understanding that in America's quiet suburban neighborhoods, normalcy is always just one stray goose, one volunteer mix-up, one nosy neighbor report, and one broken water heater away from becoming absolute, unforgettable, perfect chaos.